Now that we know what the greatest common factor is from 8.1, we can move on to 8.2 and start factoring using the greatest common factor. So there's your date, and we'll get started. Factor each polynomial. So if you're factoring a polynomial, this is your first question. What is the greatest common factor? So over here, we'll just kind of think about greatest common factor we worked on in our last lesson. First, look at your numbers. You have a 4 and a 3. So they don't have any common factors, so you might say a 1. And now look at your x's. How many x's do they have in common? They have an x in common. So your greatest common factor is 1x. So what you're going to do is you're going to factor a 1x out of both of these terms. Mathematically, an easy way to look at this is to think about it like division. If you were to divide out a 1x from both terms, what would you have left over? So you can go piece by piece. 4 divided by 1 is 4. X squared divided by x. Now that's what we worked on last chapter. You know you can subtract those exponents and just have an x to the first power. Minus, now let's go to the next one. 3 divided by 1 is 3. And then if you have an x divided by x, if you subtract the exponents, you get x to the 0 power, which is just 1. So we factored out the GCF. We got 4x minus 3. Now our answer has to have that GCF as part of it. So that GCF of 1x, which is the same thing as just an x, goes out front of a set of parentheses. So when you factor something out of both terms, throw parentheses around it, and then your GCF goes out front. Alright, so factoring polynomials. Let's look at one a little bit more complicated. First, find that GCF. So the GCF, we have 3 terms, so we have to look at all 3 numbers. You have a 36, an 18, and a 3. What's the biggest number that fits into all 3 of those? Start by looking at the smallest number, because you know it can't be bigger than 3. So does 3 fit into 18? Yes. Does 3 fit into 36? Yes. So 3 is part of our GCF. Now let's look at the m's. How many m's do they have in common? This is an m to the 6th, m to the 4th, and m squared. So at most they all have 2 m's, so m squared. Now let's see if they have any n's in common. N squared, and because this last term doesn't have any n's, that means that they all 3 do not have that in common, so it's not part of our GCF. So our GCF is just 3m squared. So we're going to come back to our problem. We're going to divide out a 3m squared from each term. Now I'm writing this out. If you guys are doing this in your head, that's totally fine. When you divide it out, and we can go ahead and just set up our answer, that 3m squared, the GCF, is going to go in front of parentheses. Whatever we get from figuring these 3 out, that's all going to go inside your parentheses right here. So what is 36 divided by 3? 36 divided by 3 is 12. And then if you have m to the 6th and you divide it by m squared, you're going to get m to the 4th power. And then because we didn't have any n's to divide with, that's just going to stay the same, n squared. Bring down your plus sign. Now 18 divided by 3 is 6. Divide your m's, and you get m squared, and the n stays. Carry down your minus sign. 3 divided by 3 is 1. M squared divided by m squared is 1 also, so we'll just leave that 1, and we're done. That's a parenthesis. So that is your answer on that one. Alright, so this next one looks a little bit weird. You might be tempted to do some multiplying and distribute this out, but let's just kind of think about it in 2 parts. You have this section and you have this section. Do they have anything in common? Well, you might say, yeah, they have an x minus 3. So your x minus 3 is actually your GCF, because that's what they both have in common. So if you factor your GCF out front, x minus 3, let me see if I can erase. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this stuff. What do you have left over? Well, if you take out the x minus 3 from both of these, those x minus 3's are gone, leaving you with just the 7. Now over here, your x minus 3's are gone, leaving you with minus 2x. And believe it or not, that is factored. Alright, so that takes us right into factor by grouping. If you have to factor 4 terms, what we're going to do is we're going to make this a little bit easier for ourselves and group the first 2 together and group the second 2 together. And then you're going to do your factoring with your GCF. So what's the GCF of the first set? 2a cubed minus 8a squared. So look at the 2 and 8. Well, 2 is the biggest number that fits into both. And how many a's do they have in common? A squared. Parentheses. Now think about if you were taking out a 2a squared from each of these, what would you have left? Well, the 2's would divide and give you 1, and then a cubed divided by a squared is just an a. So that a's right there gave us the a to the first power. Minus, now we would divide, 8 divided by 2 gave us 4, and then a squared over a squared is equal to 1. So that's what we have. 2a squared, parentheses, a minus 4. So we're not quite done with the problem yet. Do you guys see this plus sign in the middle? That's going to come down in the middle of our 2 GCF factoring that we're doing. Now we have the second 2 terms, 3a minus 12. What can you factor out of each of these? Well, that GCF is just going to be a 3. It's the biggest number that fits in, and they do not have any a's in common. So 3 parentheses. Now if you factor out that 3, what is that going to leave you with? A minus 4. So here's the beauty of factor by grouping. Do you guys notice that we have an a minus 4 and then an a minus 4? If those 2 parentheses match, and they should, that means that we are doing this correctly and we can go ahead and get our answer. That a minus 4 that they have in common goes out front, a minus 4, and then whatever's left over, 2a squared, goes into your second set of parentheses, and that plus 3. And that is a factored answer. Alright, so that was probably a little bit weird. Let's try another one. Start with your GCF. So group the first 2, group the second 2. What's your GCF of the first 2 terms? Well, the 4 and the 3 don't have any common factors, so look at your x's. They have an x squared in common. If you factor that out, it leaves you with a 4x minus 3. Remember, this middle sign minus comes down, so it's going to be minus. Now what can you factor out of 12x plus 9? The GCF there is a 3. And what do you have left over? And technically, do you notice how it's a negative 3? So when you factor a negative 3 out of a negative 12x, it gives you 4x. And then here's the part. This is a positive 9, but if you factor a negative 3 out, you get a negative 3. So a little trick, if this middle sign is a negative subtraction and you bring that down, it's always going to change your second sign. If that was a plus, it becomes minus, and vice versa. Right, so here's our check. Do our parentheses match? Yep, they look good. So we bring that out front, 4x minus 3. And then the other set of parentheses is just what's left over. You have an x squared, and you have a minus 3. And that is our final answer. All right, one more of these, because this looks exactly like what we did on the last slide. And it is. So we're done with our intro video.